Within 19 minutes.
Thank you,
Honourable Member for Grayndler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to respond on behalf of the opposition to the Deputy Prime Minister's statement regarding the inquiry into the National Road Safety Strategy 2011-2020. And can I begin by acknowledging his personal commitment to improving road safety. He's genuine about it, not just because he's the Transport Minister, but I know that it is a long-term commitment, as he said, arising out of his own experience. Of course, it's a fact that so many of us, there would barely be an Australian who hasn't been touched by trauma on our roads, either directly or indirectly, which is why it requires a concerted effort by this parliament and indeed all parliaments, local government and the community to do what we can in our own way to make a difference. The inquiry was called in 2017, unfortunately, because the targets that were established in the National Road Safety Strategy for the decade 2011-2020, when I was the Minister, and this was the internationally recognised decade of road safety, weren't going to be met. The target for reductions was 30%. Instead, we're on track to receive a 15% reduction. Now, while a 30% reduction was an ambitious target, we should, as the Minister said, always aim high. We should, though, review our progress and make changes where necessary. Of course, the objective should be zero, but we need to acknowledge the fact that for a range of reasons, somehow after year upon year of decline in fatalities on our roads, we had a spike up just over the last few years. And there's a range of reasons, many of which were outlined by the Minister, of why that's the case. The use of mobile phones, no doubt, is having an impact on our roads. I think there's been, to some extent, some complacency in terms of state governments ran very effective awareness campaigns, and perhaps that has dropped off, a view that somehow if we just kept doing what we were doing it would continue to decline. But we need to respond, and that's why I congratulate the government on initiating this inquiry in 2017 and the Minister for making sure that not only was that inquiry received from the independent panel, but we ensured that this whole parliament engaged as one, and that's what we should be doing, because public safety isn't just about defence and our borders, it's about the safety of the travelling public each and every day. Road safety is indeed complex and difficult. Achieving improvements requires investment, perseverance and collaboration. Above all, it requires consistency and bipartisanship across the different levels of government, but also we need to engage the community in this process. Working together doesn't necessarily preclude disagreement. We will disagree on some issues about infrastructure priorities, but we shouldn't think for 1 second that what that means is that we have differences as to our objectives, because I believe we do not. It does mean, though, that we should be prepared to discuss things based upon our consideration of the facts, but work together with goodwill and a sense of purpose. And I'm certainly confident that the Deputy Prime Minister and myself can do that in this place. The inquiry is a useful contribution to the road safety debate, particularly in the areas of improving data collection and the harmonising of governance between state jurisdictions. One of the things that we did in government was move to single national transport regulators, moved from 23 to 3. We had a process as well of single licensing for heavy vehicles. In the long run, I'd say that state and territory governments need to acknowledge that their parochialism is just that it doesn't actually have, in today's world, as much relevance as it might have in the less mobile world of the early 20th century. We should have single national licences. We should have common laws so that people understand what the laws are in the different states. Common signage. Do what we can to move to a national system. That's not an infringement on state rights. It's just common sense that will make a positive difference. And again, I would call upon the state and territory ministers to put aside some of the parochialism that I have no doubt that the minister, when he has chaired the Ministerial Council, has had to deal with, just as I did. We welcome the report and the 12 recommendations to improve road safety, leadership, governance, resourcing and accountability. We also welcome the fact that in response to the report, the government has commenced a road safety governance review to improve coordination between the various jurisdictions that have an influence on road safety regulation. It's pleasing to hear of progress and continued improvements in data collection on traffic accidents, and that we now have a national baseline to measure progress. The report also outlines progress in Australian design rules in areas like electronic stability control for heavy vehicles and anti-lock braking systems for motorcycles, which are expected to save 850 lives and deliver net economic benefits worth more than $2.2 billion over the next 15 years. Today's vehicles are so much safer than those of decades ago. Also, the behaviour is so much different today. When my son was much younger, it used to always amaze me that when I got in the car and he was in the back with his friends, I'd say, "Have you got your seatbelts on?" And before I could get the first two words out, they automatically had them on. That cultural change from when I was his age, and people would often drive around without their seatbelts on, even when seatbelts were in cars, just as a matter of fact, is a major breakthrough, just as airbags and other measures have made such a difference. I'm all for a competitive motor vehicle industry where manufacturers compete to deliver the best and most popular products. But in the 21st century, safety has to come before the factors that used to be there in terms of what colour a car was, indeed how much sound it made, all those considerations. Safety has to be first. And one of the things is that people are very conscious, much more conscious now about those issues. Of course, one of the things that has happened as a direct result is that many of the accidents that would have caused fatalities now just cause serious injury because people survive. As the Deputy Prime Minister noted in his contribution, 37,000 people are hospitalised each year due to road trauma. That has a terrible impact on the individuals, on their families and their friends, but it also is a loss to the national economy. This is an economic issue as well. This is waste of human life and potential, and we need to do much, much better. There are three things that you can do. Infrastructure, better roads, you need better design and regulations, and you also need personal behaviour. And all three, every report I've seen on road safety, and I've read a lot of them over the years, comes down to those three factors. When it comes to better roads, there have been substantial improvements. I'm very proud of the increased investment that we put into the Pacific Highway and the Bruce Highway. I'll never forget, and the completion of the Hume Highway. I'll never forget having a meeting in my office with Wayne Sachs, who was the Chief Ambulance Officer from Gympie. And Koroita, the figures, when I asked them for my department, Koroita was by far the most dangerous part of the Bruce Highway. Mr Sachs, an AMBO of many years standing, sat in my office and just pleaded for support for the upgrade of the Koroita section. He had been just so many fatal accidents, and I was very pleased to go to the then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, of course, and the then Treasurer, Wayne Swan, were both very familiar coming from Nambour with that section of the highway. And we got it done in terms of the beginning of, well, some of it was completed on our watch. Other parts were completed and was very important. I'm very proud when I drive up the Pacific Highway to see the difference that it made. As the Deputy Prime Minister knows, because we've discussed it, my name, Anthony, comes from my young cousin who was killed on the Pacific Highway just before I was born at Halfway Creek. And certainly safer roads make an enormous difference, and I've always felt a responsibility to leave a legacy when it comes to those issues. At the end of last year, the Deputy Prime Minister and I had a chat, and I think it's the way that Parliament should work. We spoke about the Princes Highway. I'd been down the South Coast and met with the editors of the newspapers who'd run a campaign, Fix It Now, on the Princes Highway. The South Coast Register, the Milton Ulladulla Times, Shoalhaven and Nowra News and Kiama Independent have run an effective campaign advancing the interests of their communities and serving the public interest. One of the things that arose out of that was something that doesn't happen that often. In no context, with no urging from the Parliament, we put out a joint statement. There should be more of that across the Parliament, in my view, and we've committed to bipartisanship on that issue to see what we can do. Historically, the truth is it's not part of the national highway. There's therefore historically governments of both persuasions at the national level haven't invested large amounts in the Princes Highway. That's the truth. But there's a clear case for us to do so, and to do so in a bipartisan way. Could I say that there has been in recent times an area of disagreement, which is over the issue of heavy vehicles and safe rates. The safe rates issue was pursued by me as a minister, and it arose out of a bipartisan report of the Parliament that was chaired by the late Paul Neville, the member for Hinkler, someone who had the respect of everyone in this Parliament, and a very genuine guy, and a very committed representative of his electorate. The fact is that when the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal was abolished and not to be replaced by anything, it did leave a gap in road safety. The fact is that if you leave that system to the market, whilst the market can achieve many things as a signal, one of the things that the market that characterises the free market is it has no conscience. So if a truck driver is placed under pressure to drive too long, to put in a bid for work versus someone who's a competitor, to undercut them to get the work, which leads to bad practice in terms of speeding or use of drugs in order to stay awake, that has an impact on our roads. And I would like that issue of heavy vehicle safety and safe rates to be progressed in the future, and I hope that we can do so. And I raised this issue in the spirit that I'm sure the Deputy Prime Minister knows it is intended. We need to address that issue, because at the moment I don't think we're doing enough in that area. As the Minister has said as well, one of the things about regional highways is that regional Australians are overwhelmingly overrepresented when it comes to victims of road traumas. That's why whoever is in government, what we can't have is a circumstance whereby we look at the political pendulum to determine road funding. We need to look at issues of where the investment is needed. Areas like the Black Spots program is very effective. Heavy vehicles and safety program is very effective. We need to make sure that those people who are delivering the program actually get the investment done when that investment has been allocated, rather than have underinvestment and underspends in those areas. We need to always take the opportunity to look to the future, and I congratulate the government on establishing the Office of Future Transport Technologies. It's very important that we look at the impact that electric vehicles are going to have, the impact that driverless cars are going to have in terms of road safety. There are a range of other issues that we need to address when it comes to road safety as well. I'm very concerned about the increased numbers of fatalities and incidents involving cyclists on our roads. There is also a significant increase in pedestrians who are either fatally killed or injured on our roads, and I wonder whether part of that is the impact of mobiles, people just walking out when they're distracted, but certainly it is very much a worrying trend indeed. When it comes to moving forward as well, I was very pleased that at the ALP National Conference held in Adelaide last December, we committed to the establishment of a National Office of Road Safety, and I acknowledge that the Minister is looking at those issues as well and raised it as part of his statement. I think that a dedicated unit within the department looking at best practice research, data collection, what the next 10-year National Road Safety Strategy should look like to commence in 2021 is very important. Looking at the relationship between the different levels of government, law enforcement, motoring organisations, experts, research bodies, bring in all the relevant stakeholders, because all of us in a country like Australia, with our vast distances, with a relatively small population for the size of our continent, roads are going to continue to be important into the future, and road safety, I want to see a return to the decline in road safety, as I know, in terms of road numbers being improved, and I note that the last year reversed that upward trend, which was there. But I pledge that on behalf of Labor that we want to work with the government to have a bipartisan approach on these issues.
I thank the member for Grainler. Thank you. I have received a message from the Senate returning the Industrial Chemicals Notification and Assessment Amendment Bill 2017 without amendment. The following message from the Senate has been received. The Senate has passed a bill for an Act to amend the Aboriginal Land Rights Northern Territory Act 1976 and for related purposes, and transmits it to the House of Representatives for its concurrence. The Clerk.
First reading, a bill for an Act to amend the Aboriginal Land Rights Northern Territory Act 1976 and for